The music of the great Curtis Mayfield. Good morning, I'm Jeff Chard. On behalf of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Utica Worship Committee, you are welcome here. Each of us is invited to bring our whole selves to this shared community, our joys, our concerns, what we believe, who we love, who we are. Welcome. If you can stay with us at the conclusion of today's service, we'll have breakout rooms so that all of us, regulars and especially newer guests, can make and renew connections on a more personal basis. Announcements?
This is Jules. I have a quick announcement from the UUUUtica inclusion team. We ran our first session of our first welcoming workshop last Thursday. We had 20 humans and 5 cats show up to talk about Gender and Sexuality 101. We're going to offer another session of this interactive workshop today from 1:30 to 3 o'clock. The Zoom info will be posted in the chat right about now, and we hope to see you there.
Thank you, Jules. And if you are new here, there is a form that we would invite you to fill out that's also in the chat. Dan Buckingham is with us this morning. Dan and his wife, Tina Betts, are longtime UUUuticans. Their children, Sophie and Owen, grew up in this church. Over the years, many of us have attended Dan's art talks at Munson-Williams and at the Everson. And Dan says he's going to give another talk for our UU community in conjunction with his next Munson-Williams exhibition this summer, once things open up a little bit more. A part of Dan's concept for today's Black Art Matters presentation is for us to be able to explore additional artists and more images in greater detail on our own schedules. Dan has prepared a PDF that we can download in 6 smaller parts. You'll find the links in yesterday's MailChimp reminder, and it will also be in next Thursday's newsletter. Dan, thank you for being with us this morning and for your extra efforts in our behalf. Dan has mentioned that he's happy to hear from anyone. His email is in the PDFs. All of his information is in the directory. And Dan, in fact, said he would be happy to Zoom with anyone if anyone wants to follow up on today's topic. We are, during today's portions that have Dan's presentation, we're going to turn off the chat so that we can focus on the words and images that we'll see on the screen. Today, we celebrate and pay tribute to Black art and artists in all forms, visual, musical, written, starting with these opening thoughts. Langston Hughes, poet of the Harlem Renaissance, wrote, "Perhaps the mission of an artist is to interpret beauty to people, the beauty within ourselves." Cesar Cruz, Mexican author and poet, said, "Art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable." And finally, the words of our 35th president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who said, "If sometimes our great artists have been the most critical of our society, it is because their sensitivity and their concern for justice, which must motivate any true artist, makes them aware that our nation falls short of its highest potential. I see little of more importance to the future of our country and our civilization than full recognition of the place of the artist." Let us open our hearts and minds to the experience of community and the wisdom of love.
Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. With all of our voices and all of our visions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such reach out to me. With all of our voices and all of our visions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such reach out to me. With all of our voices and all of our visions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such reach out to me. With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony.
We light our flaming chalice as a beloved people, united in love and thirsting for restorative justice. May it melt away the tethers that uphold whiteness in our midst. May it spark in us a spirit of humility. May it ignite in us radical love that transforms our energy into purposeful action. This is a chalice of audacious hope. This chalice shines a light on our shared past, signaling our intention to listen deeply, reflect wisely, and move boldly towards our highest ideals.
Namaste. My name is Daniel Buckingham, and I'm a professor at Pratt Munson-Williams here in UUUUtica, New York. I want to thank all of you for attending today's presentation and everyone who assisted with the presentation today. As Jeff mentioned, there are 6 PDFs that you can download on your own time and investigate and be curious. I want to thank Jeff Chard for inviting me today to speak to the UU congregation. It's also wonderful to see many faces that I have not seen in a little over a year due to COVID and so forth. So I hope to be a part of the congregation on a regular basis here on Zoom. As Universalists, you're very familiar with the long history of advocating for social justice, honoring diversity, and embracing global spiritual identity. You are all the perfect representation for this kind of presentation because you're already immersed in social advocacy. About 7 years ago in 2013, some Black organizers reacted to the Trayvon Martin trial and started the Black Lives Matter movement, which is a very important part of our continuing civil rights movement here in the United States. And that's what's going to frame my presentation today. And I'm going to share my screen here, and we can start to look at some of the work. Again, all of this work is available with the PDFs. This is a work by Greg Leon, which was done shortly after the creation of the Black Lives Matter movement. And it's a large neon sign, and it's entitled Double America. With neon signs, they use a blackout paint. And we can see in the top word of America, he used the paint to black out the front of the tube, which pushes the light to reflect off of the wall and gives us a clear graphic of the word America. There is a reversed American word here below, and this is also electrified and illuminated, but it's completely covered with the blackout paint, which is very similar to tar, that has a long history in subversive slavery. Greg Leon wants us to stand in front of this and reflect on the duality and the chasm between America on many fronts. Looking at the signage, we're going to now go to Gordon Parks, who is a very well-known American photographer. This piece was, a photograph was taken in 1956 in Alabama, and we can see these wonderfully, just a minute. These beautifully dressed mother and daughter. Sorry, I'm not sure why my computer's flipping out here a little. Okay, here we go. And they're standing underneath this neon sign for the colored entrance. This is very painful to see and look at our history from mid-century of the 20th century, but it also shows that there was an economy for signage and very elaborate signage to enforce the issues of slavery and lack of civil rights. We're now looking at the work of Ammonia Lewis, who was a woman who was Black and Native American. She eventually found her way to Boston in her late teens. She was from the Albany area, and she started to create sculpture and won a prize to go to Italy and started to carve marble there in a traditional neoclassical reference. And we can see two pieces here that stand about 30 inches tall, carved out of Carrara marble. One is Forever Free, and we can see the chain here. It's kind of a romantic look at the break for slavery. And we can see on the right side here, two images of Indian combat, which has 3 Native Americans from different tribes fighting each other. This work was her interest in trying to do something autobiographical, but also looking at Henry Wadsworth Fellowes' The Song of Hiawatha, where there's this quote here, "I behold our nation scattered, all forgetful of my counsels, weakened and warring with each other." And we can see that as a kind of analogy today in the situation that we face with the Black Lives Matter movement here in the United States. Now we're moving about 160 years later, and we have this work by Cara Walker who was born in 1969, and she normally works in a two-dimensional way, but recently did this large piece in New York City, and it's made out of sugar, and we can see this kind of a sphinx-like black female figure in this abandoned sugar factory. Scattered around this large form are small children holding baskets. These are cast out of bronze and covered with molasses. So the smell of sugar and the history of sugar and the plantation history related to the economy of sugar is her theme here. She also works with the silhouette form on walls, and this is representative of that. And she's trying to dissect the violent underbelly of the antebellum South. And some of her images are quite jarring and intense. David Hammond's, his early work from the 60s, he actually took his body with tar and pigment and pressed it into paper and canvas. He also pressed it into objects. And here we can see this door of admissions office with his body printed on the front of it. He's playing with the idea that he's denied access to the art world. Later, he stood out in front of the Museum of Modern Art in the 80s and sold snowballs, different sizes, to talk about the white dominance of the chilling white dominance of the art world in New York City. Still at this time, the Museum of Modern Art had very few pieces in their collection by Black artists. Into the 90s, he took the Marcus Garvey tricolored flag that was designed originally in 1920 and turned it into the American flag. Here we can see the black for the Black American skin color and the red for the blood that has been shed with their history, and the green to talk about the vibrant future and wealth of the cultural history with Africa and the United States. Dred Scott is an artist who works with performance work and agitprop. The term agitprop comes from Russian constructivism, defined as like agitation propaganda. He's also kind of changed his name a little bit and tagged Dred Scott, who lived 1799 to 1858, who unsuccessfully sued for the freedom of his family. And you can see these hyperlinks here where you can read about this, but he did a performance in New York City with the I Am Not a Man, because he considered that he does not have the full identity as a Black American. This is a small piece that he made, a figure that he built on this pedestal, and this is a historic African tribal art. And he's playing with the kind of tongue-in-cheek, like even this piece, which is 200 years old, they even knew at the time that they were going to have to raise their hands and say, I do not have a gun, in front of the police threat of the police state. Here we have Lorraine Simpson's work. She has the figures turning away from the camera, and connecting their braids so that we're not really sure the real identity of these people. And it's how Blacks are profiled in our society, but yet connected by the universality of their treatment, even though these two people don't know each other. And they could come from East Coast or West Coast or the South or the North cities, it doesn't matter. There's still constant profiling going on in our society. W.E.B. Du Bois did some wonderful work that is now just being recognized in graphics. And here he's trying to show with this bar diagram how there is land owned by slaves, previous slaves in Georgia, and how they had invested in the land and created an economy. And he also set this up in the shape of the state of Georgia to try to advertise the idea that they were concerned about their economy and well-being as slaves or free slaves. Okay, that's the first part of what I have to show you today. We'll move on in the program. Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome to Together Time. Since we're talking about Black artists today, we're going to read a biography about one. It's about Gordon Parks, and it's called How the Photographer Captured Black and White America by Carol Boston Weatherford, with illustrations by Jamie Kristoff. The youngest of 15, Parks arrives stillborn and is nearly left for dead until a dip in ice water shocks his tiny heart to beat. The baby is named for the man who saved his life, Dr. Gordon. When young Gordon crosses the prairie on horseback, nothing seems beyond reach. But his white teacher tells her all-black class, "You'll all wind up porters and waiters." What did she know? After Gordon loses his mother at age 14, he moves in with his sister in Minneapolis. Soon on his own, Gordon works odd jobs: busboy, piano player, and finally, porter and waiter. 25 years old and all but broke when a magazine spread about migrant farm workers inspires him to buy a used camera. That $7.50 is the best money he will ever spend. In 1 month, he teaches himself enough for an exhibit at the camera store. Soon, he is shooting fashion and portraits. One model tells him to take his camera to the big city. In Chicago, Gordon's shots of struggling families on the South Side win him a chance to be a government photographer. He leaves the Midwest and turns his camera on Washington. Gordon wonders, what should I shoot? Search for a subject, says his boss. In the nation's capital, he passes the White House and the Supreme Court. In the shadow of the Capitol, he sees black families living in alley dwellings. He can see that blacks have it harder than whites. He passes statues, monuments, and memorials to mighty heroes. But there are enough photos of white men carved in marble and granite. He glimpses whites-only signs in shop windows and learns firsthand that even if there is no sign, it doesn't mean a black man will be served. Boiling mad, Parks vows to lay bare racism with his lens. He shares his vision with his boss, who points him toward his subject. Talk to her. She knows the struggle. She is Ella Watson, a cleaning lady in the building where Parks works. She supports 5 children on just over $1,000 a year. The photographer follows her for weeks, home, church, and to work at 4 in the morning. After a long day, she studies the Bible with her family. Gordon takes pictures of her grandchildren, too, dressing, eating, reading, playing, not yet knowing the racism that they will surely face. Over his long career, Gordon's photos will run in Vogue and Life magazines, their first black photographer. He will write novels, make movies, compose music and poetry, and be hailed a Renaissance man. But Gordon's most famous shot will be American Gothic. In the newspaper, the photo exposed to the nation the unfairness of segregation. Standing before the flag of freedom, cleaning lady Ella Watson, who holds the tools of her trade and the hopes of her grandchildren. She knows all too well that the opportunities the flag symbolizes are denied her because of skin color. Yet she dares to dream of and strive for better. Through Gordon's lens, her struggle gained a voice. You don't have to hear her story to know her prayer. And that's the end. There's a little bit more information about Gordon Parks. If you're interested in seeing this, as always, you can email me at religioused@uuuutica.org. That was Gordon Parks, How the Photographer Captured Black and White America by Carol Boston Weatherford, with illustrations by Jamie Kristoff. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Steph. Your donations and pledges support the work of this church. You'll find a link in the chat with our address and also our PayPal button. Your gifts are the building blocks that make possible this community of friends and seekers. Thank you.
Don't you know, talking about a revolution sounds like a whisper. Don't you know, they're talking about a revolution, it sounds like a whisper. While they're sitting in the welfare lines, crying at the doorsteps of those armies of salvation, wasting time in the unemployment lines, sitting around waiting for a promotion. Don't you know they're talking about a revolution? It sounds like a whisper. Poor people gonna rise up and get their share. Poor people gonna rise up and take what's theirs. Don't you know you better run, 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 run. Said you better run, 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 run. 'Cause finally the tables are starting to turn. Talking about a revolution. Yes, finally the tables are starting to turn. Talking about revolution, oh. Talking about a revolution, oh. Standing in the welfare lines, crying at the doorsteps of those armies of salvation, wasting time in the unemployment lines, sitting around waiting for a promotion. Don't you know, talking about a revolution sounds like a whisper. And finally the tables are starting to turn. Talking about a revolution. Yes, finally the tables are starting to turn. Talking about a revolution, oh. Talking about a revolution, oh. Talking about a revolution, oh.
So with the Black Arts Matter presentation today, I'm going to show you about 10 more images and talk a little bit. But my intention is for all of you to tap into the PDFs that I have provided. And there's about 45 artists that I selected from thousands and thousands. And they show a diverse approach to artists who are dealing with civil rights and identity and, contemporary issues. And my hope is that they're all like a good read, like a good book. And I want you to invite those artists to be a part of your personal bookshelf. This is Martin Purrier. He took a cap from the Civil War and blew it up and slightly distorted it with a rose window here. Piece called Tabernacle. And as you gaze inside this volume, you can see inside that there is some mortars and bomb forms from the Civil War era. And the idea that we peer through this window gives us an idea that we're still not yet finished discussing that history and the pain in our society. Carrie Mae Weems originally started making work by just walking around with her camera and taking pictures and asking questions in her neighborhood. And when she asked this young boy what he wanted to be when he grows up, his response was, I want to be a white man because my mama say, and I don't want to read this fully, the N-word ain't shit. Excuse my French. But it's painful to think that in our society, we still have children walking around self-suppressing themselves at such a young age when the opportunities in the 21st century should be for all. Robert Colescott was a wonderful artist. He passed in 2009. And he plays with stereotypes in his large paintings and storytelling. And this is George Washington Carver crossing the Delaware with all the American stereotypes. This is a piece from 1995, so it's about 25 years ago. And it's called The Bilingual Cop. In one sense, he's standing behind this brick wall and harassing this homeless Black person and also this homeless Mexican worker and talking to them in two different ways, but both about trying to clean up and get them out of a place that they have no ownership of. And we can see this as an analogy of the wall that was trying to be built on our southern border. In 1992, Fred Wilson put together this exhibition at the Maryland Baltimore History Museum. And all he did was, instead of bring his artwork into the museum, he just went into the archives and found the artifacts from the museum and the history and put those on exhibit. And he put them in these dual kind of conversations. So we see here silverware that was for the upper class empowered whites in Baltimore at that time. And here below, these are the shackles that held the slaves. And these were also all made in Baltimore. There's an economy of these objects. And this is the sad truth about our history of segregation and so forth, is we have all these economies built through objects and professions to suppress people. And I have some links on these PDFs that you can read about these particular exhibitions. This next artist is Emma Amos. She recently just passed away. She was 80 years old. And she's originally from New Jersey, and then she worked in Georgia for a long time, but she taught at Rutgers for most of her career. And this is the exhibition that will be at Munson-Williams later this year that I would invite all of you. We can organize something, and I'll go through Jeff to do that, where we could go there and I could talk to you about some of this work. And this is one of the pieces that we would see there. It's a large painting. It's a self-portrait. She's on a tightrope and she's in front of a crowd. And in one hand, she has like a museum artifact of a t-shirt that you would buy in like an art shop. And the other hand, she's balancing with her paintbrushes. We can see on the t-shirt, it really echoes a piece from 1899 that Gauguin painted called Two Tahitian Women. In a sense, she's using this as an analogy of her duality and how African Americans were used as models for Europeans and Americans in the earlier history of the 18th and 19th century of art. We can also see that, you know, she's bearing her breast here, and, you know, it's like parallel to Gauguin's interest in staying in Tahiti and trying to be infatuated with these exotic people from another culture. But, you know, there's still unspoken tensions there and questions about the intent of why we consider Gauguin's work to be some kind of masterpiece. This painting is surrounded by Mali mud cloth, which is a material that is used to emancipate pain and suffering, and that frames Emma Amos's large portrait here. Kerry James Marshall created an entire black spectrum color wheel. So if we think about the typical color wheel of Roy G. Biv, you know, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, he created a black spectrum of paint. So he has red, black, orange, black, yellow, black, blue, black. And when we look close at the skin tones of these figures in his work, they portray this invention of a black spectrum. All of these works are autobiographical, and this particular piece here from 2017 is called Souvenir. And above the ceiling here, we can see all these people that had something to do with the history of civil rights in the United States. And we can also see on the wall here, Reverend Martin Luther King and also Kennedy and so forth. Kathleen Thomas takes history, mostly European history, and turns it inside out. Here she's looking at the history of this work by Manet, The Luncheon in the Grass, which Manet actually took the composition from Raphael, which is a small piece here from 150 years earlier. And now we have these three Black women dressed up in the same type of compositional use. And so this is large scale digital photography that wants to compete with these so-called European master paintings. Nick Cave, who is a performance artist from Chicago, he creates these sound suits. Some of them are to protect, like when we think about all the beatings of people who have been profiled, some of these harken back to like ways to protect as shields in our society. And the other ones celebrate, like a garden of possibilities and creativity. These are all based on also the history of tribal African ritual dancing forms. So these are called sound suits, and you can see video links online of these being performed. Adrienne Piper, a woman who lives in New York City now, she started in the 60s doing work, and when she first moved to New York City, this is her doing a performance where she walked around with this sign on herself, wet paint. And the idea that she was like a fish out of water, like she didn't really fit into the construct of the everyday urban environment there. We think about the history of the Black Lives Matter movement as a response to the issue with not coming to terms with the judgment of Zimmerman, who killed Trayvon Martin. This artist here, Devon Shimoyama, this is a celebratory ritual memorial object to Trayvon Martin, who was wearing a hoodie. And he has now created this like garden form to celebrate as a memorial Trayvon Martin's passing. This woman here, who really goes by Rosy, she's interested in the Asian phenomena in Japan and Korea, where some gangs actually paint their skin black to emulate Black American culture, urban culture. And so she uses Asian imagery with Black cultural urban identifiers in her work. One of the things that you're going to see in the near future is more murals being put up about Black history. One of our alumni, Jared Diaz, who works with two other artists, has been going around to cities in the United States. This is in Rochester, and I have the location. You can go see it, where he took a historic photograph of John Lewis from 1963, and it's blown up on the street, large scale, as like a black and white photograph, to talk about the history of place and identity within our American history. This is the last piece that I will show, and this is an artist, Theaster Gates. This is really where I see the curative. He has spent like 30 years trying to turn around the art economy and economic jobs for people in urban areas, where he has bought dilapidated buildings. This was a bank in Chicago that was falling apart and turned it into a community art center. He also hires and trains people from the city to make his work. And his idea is to not only have an art center, but an art economy, which gives jobs to people who are normally at risk. And here, all of these books were books that he got from homes that were decrepit in the nearby area where this bank used to be. And this is where the community goes after school to make art and also read and elevate their presence and purpose towards the future. Thank you for my presentation today. I hope you get a chance to look at the PDFs. I want to thank Jeff again and all of you and your patience for including me in today's sermon. Thank you.
at last. My love has come along. My lonely days are over, and life feels like a song. Oh yeah, at last the skies above are blue. My heart was wrapped up in clover the night I looked at you. I found a dream that I could speak to, a dream that I can call my own. I found a thrill to press my cheek to, a thrill that I have never known. Oh yeah, when you smiled, oh, and then the spell was cast, and here we are in heaven, for you are mine at last. I had a dream that I could speak to, a dream that I can call my own. I found a thrill to press my cheek to, a thrill that I have never known. Oh, and you smiled, oh, and then the spell was cast, and here we are in heaven, for you are mine. Oh, you are mine at last.
Let us prepare our hearts for the extinguishing of the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again.
Thank you, Donna. Or I should say attorney Donna Akiyamoa. And Donna is now in North Carolina working on behalf of refugee resettlement. Thanks, Dan Buckingham. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, making your images come alive for us, enhancing our understanding. And thanks to the usual cast of suspects, Melissa Bartlett, who does it all, not just on Sundays, to Bob Ford, Jules Heller, Stephanie Markham. Most importantly, to each of you for being a part of our UU community this morning. Our closing words are those of Ernest Critchlow, a Harlem Renaissance and WPA artist. He said, "Art says, stop looking at my face or the clothes I wear and look at another important part of me. It's the part of me I can't talk about. So I dance it, or paint it, or compose music about it. Ernest Critchlow. Please, folks, stick around for the breakout rooms. We're going to have, we're going to keep Dan with us so that you can interact with him, or you can enter smaller chat rooms. All of that will be following our Duke Ellington postlude. Thank you.